Hello friends and welcome to my new video. In this video, we will explore step by step how to create the product promo video you are currently watching on screen. Before we dive into the details, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on new videos. If you're ready, let's get started. First, let's create a new composition. We will set our resolution to 1920 by 1080 with a frame rate of 30. This will serve as our final composition, where we will arrange all our scenes back to back. Now, let's create a new solid and rename it to background. For the color, we will set it to pure black. Now, let's create another new composition to build our first scene. To set up the background, we'll drag our smoke video onto the timeline. We will change the blending mode of the video to screen and then lower its opacity value. Next, let's bring the dust particles video into our workspace. We will apply the exact same blending modes and opacity adjustments to this layer as well. Great. Now, let's create a new adjustment layer. From the Effects and Presets panel, we'll apply the Fast Box Blur effect onto our adjustment layer and set the blur radius value to 2. This way, we apply a subtle and professional blur effect to our background. Alright, now let's create a new solid layer. After adjusting the solid's color from the color option, we click OK to place the solid onto our workspace. Next, click the checkbox next to this solid to convert our layer into a 3D layer. While the layer is selected, press the R key on your keyboard to open up the rotation settings. Now, we set the X rotation value to 90 to rotate our layer horizontally. Next, let's move the layer to the bottom of the composition, press the S key on the keyboard to open the scale settings, and scale the layer up. After finishing the scaling, hold down the Shift key and press P to bring up the position settings alongside it. Now, by adjusting these position values, we correctly place our layer. This will serve as our ground layer, and we will place our product model right on top of it. Now, let's select the rectangle tool from the top menu. The reason we are doing this is that the top edge of our solid layer looks too sharp. While the solid layer is selected, we apply a mask to its upper section. Afterward, we check the inverted option in the mask settings to reverse the effect. Next, let's open up the mask settings. We will set the mask expansion value to -217 and the mask feather value to 257. This allows us to apply a very smooth and seamless transition to the top edge of our layer. Great. Now let's drag the Red Bull model from the project panel into our scene. In the settings window that pops up, we click on the Make Comp Size option. This automatically scales the model to perfectly fit our composition dimensions. Then we click OK to complete the process. While the model layer is selected, press the S key to open the scale settings and increase the size of our model. Now, let's adjust it so that it sits perfectly right on top of our ground layer. Right now, the model looks a bit too close to the camera, so we press the P key to open the position settings, and while holding down the Shift key, we push it back along the Z axis. Great. Now let's select our model again and rotate it so that it's perfectly parallel to the camera. Perfect. Everything is going smoothly so far. Now we can move on to adding lights to our scene. To do this, let's create a new light layer from the menu. We will change the light type to parallel. Our light settings can stay exactly as shown on screen. Now click OK to add the light to our scene. Excellent. Now let's open the transform properties of our light layer and quickly adjust the direction of the light using the position values. Once adjusted, we'll add a keyframe to the position property. Let's move to the 2-second mark on the timeline and add another keyframe. Then we return to the first keyframe and move the light source directly behind our model. This way, while the model starts on a dark background, the light will emerge from behind, making the edges of the model pop out subtly. Now, let's add a second light to our scene. Open up the transform properties for this light layer once again, but this time, adjust the light towards the opposite side of our model. We will apply the exact same position animation workflow to this light as well. This way, the light will emerge from both the right and left sides of the model, creating a much more premium and appealing visual style. Next, let's select the keyframes at the end. Right-click and under Keyframe Assistant, apply Easy Ease In to give our movement a smoother deceleration. Excellent. Now, let's take a quick preview to check our animation and see if everything looks perfect or if there are any errors we need to fix. Great, we are almost at the end of our first scene. There's just one final step left. Now, let's create some floating particles around our model. To do this, let's create a new solid and set its color to pure white. From the Effects and Presets panel, apply the CC Ball Action effect to our solid layer. Next, set the grid spacing value to 2 and reduce the particle size by changing the ball size value to 14. We will increase the scatter value to 800 to disperse these tiny particles across our scene. Right now, the particles are static and not moving. To animate them, hold down the Alt key on your keyboard and click once on the Scatter Motion stopwatch. In the expression field that opens up, type time*2. This will make the particles fly around naturally. However, they look a bit too dense and sharp right now, which ruins the aesthetic. So let's open the opacity settings of this solid layer and lower its value. This gives us a much cleaner and more cinematic look. Finally, I want a completely black screen at the very beginning of the scene for a clean intro. For this, we create a new black solid, open its opacity properties, and add a keyframe. Move 30 frames forward, add another keyframe, and drop the opacity value down to 0. Then, select all these keyframes and apply Easy Ease to create a smooth, professional fade-in transition. Great, everything looks perfect so far. Now, let's head over to our main composition, the final assembly, and bring in the Scene 1 composition we just finished. With that, our first scene is officially placed. Next, let's create a new composition and name it Scene 2. We'll bring our pre-rendered water MOV file into the scene. Open the scale settings to increase its size and adjust its position on the canvas. Since we want the water to grow into the frame from the outside, we'll move the layer's anchor point outside the workspace and add a scale keyframe. Move 30 frames forward, add another keyframe, and then go back to the first one to set the scale value to 0. Select all keyframes, apply Easy Ease, and open the graph editor to refine the speed and flow of the animation. Excellent. Right now the water is white, but we want it to match our product's branding. To do this, apply the tritone effect to the layer. Open the color palette and select a vibrant hue that matches the Red Bull colors. Now, let's jump back into Scene 1, copy the background video and blur layers, and paste them into our second scene. Once we've arranged the layers correctly, increase the scale for the smoke and dust particles. If the background is hidden, simply change the blending mode of the water layer to Screen. This will bring all those background details back into view. Finally, return to the final composition. Drag Scene 2 and place it above Scene 1. Move the layer to the exact timestamp where the transition should occur. Select the first scene, go to the Edit menu, and use Split Layer to cut it, then delete the unnecessary part. This ensures our scenes follow each other in a seamless sequence. Great, let's keep the momentum going. Now let's create a new composition and start building our third scene. Drag the other Red Bull model into the workspace. In the Settings window, select Make Comp Size once again and click OK to finalize it. Open the scale properties to enlarge the model, then set the most aesthetic position and angle for this specific scene. With the model selected, this time we'll open both the position and Z rotation properties. Add initial keyframes for both values. Move to the 4-second mark on the timeline, pull the model upward, and adjust the Z position value to enhance the sense of depth. Now, let's move to the 5-second mark and set the Z rotation value to 1 full rotation. Select the position keyframes and apply Easy Ease. Then open the graph editor to precisely refine the velocity curves. To ensure the model enters the scene with more speed and energy, I'll slide the end position keyframe slightly back toward the beginning. Excellent. Now, to make our model look much more realistic and premium, let's move on to the lighting stage. This time, we set the light type to Environment and add it to our scene. We'll bring the HDR light texture we downloaded earlier into the workspace. In the light settings, set the source to the HDR texture layer we just added. Now, by adjusting the transform properties, we can perfect the way the light and reflections interact with the model. Finally, let's copy the smoke, dust particles, and blur layers we used in the previous scenes and paste them here. We'll place these layers directly beneath our model and refine their order. Now, let's head back to the main composition and drag our third scene onto the timeline. Move to the point where the second scene ends and align the start of the third scene right there. Use Split Layer on the second scene to cut it and delete the unnecessary trailing part. With that, all our scenes are now perfectly arranged and the edit is complete. Great. Now, by repeating these exact same steps, we will build the remaining scenes of our project. To keep the video from becoming unnecessarily long, I'm going to fast forward through the creation of these next scenes. Since we are using the exact same techniques, there won't be any new workflows introduced. However, if you get stuck at any point, feel free to rewind the video and watch that specific section again. Great. Now, let's create a new composition and start building our final scene. For this step, we will reuse the ground solid layer we created in the first scene. So, let's jump back into the Scene 1 composition, copy that ground solid layer, and paste it right here into our final scene. Afterward, we'll organize the layer hierarchy. Next, let's bring our main model into the scene. Open the scale settings to enlarge it and adjust it so that it sits perfectly on top of the ground layer. We'll make some precise micro adjustments here to ensure the model looks completely stable and grounded. Then, open the position settings and push the model back along the Z-axis. Once the model's orientation looks exactly right, we'll add a position keyframe. Move 50 frames forward on the timeline and add another keyframe. Now, hold down the Shift key and press R to bring up the rotation properties alongside it, and add a keyframe to the Z rotation. Let's return to the very first keyframe and move the model completely outside of the composition area. Then, go to the final keyframe and change the Z rotation value to 1 full turn. Finally, select all the keyframes, apply Easy Ease, and open the graph editor to dynamically refine our velocity curves. Great, now let's bring our second model into the scene. To speed up our workflow, open the position and scale settings of our first model and apply the exact same values to this new model. This ensures both models have the identical size and starting position. Next, position this new model to the left side of the previous one. Now let's bring the third model into our scene. We'll follow the exact same efficient method here. Copy the position and scale values from the previous model, paste them onto the new one, and then slide this model further to the left. Once our models are placed, select all of them and move their anchor points down toward the very bottom of the layers. To arrange the models more precisely, let's switch our active camera view to the top view. Looking from above allows us to align them perfectly along a straight line. Next, change the camera angle to the right view to verify that the models are sitting perfectly and flat on the ground layer. Finally, open the scale settings for all models and scale them down proportionally in a controlled manner. This gives us a much cleaner, more professional, and visually balanced composition. Great, now let's switch back to the active camera view. Let's adjust the spacing between our models a bit here to ensure we get a much more visually appealing and balanced composition on screen. All right, that looks spot on. Now, using the exact same workflow and copying methods, let's quickly add the remaining Red Bull models to our scene. To keep the video moving at a good pace, I'll fast forward through this part since we are simply repeating the exact same steps we just did. Excellent. Everything looks flawless and smooth so far. Now, let's select all the newly added Red Bull models, open up their position properties, and then their rotation settings. Let's add initial keyframes for both position and Z rotation. Move 50 frames forward on the timeline, set the Z rotation value to 1 full turn, and add a position keyframe right there. Now, let's head back to the very first keyframe and move the models upward, completely out of the frame. Finally, let's select all these keyframes and press F9 on the keyboard to apply Easy Ease. Afterward, we'll open up the graph editor to precisely adjust the velocity curves and perfect the smooth pacing of our animation. Great! Right now, all of our models are entering the scene at the exact same time. To fix this uniformity, let's look at the timestamp where our main model reaches the exact center of the screen. We'll select the other model layers and shift their starting points right to that specific moment. However, you'll notice that these models are still entering the frame simultaneously, which doesn't look visually appealing enough. Let's fix this quickly as well. While the layers are selected, I'm going to stagger them on the timeline, leaving a 3-frame gap between each model. This way, the models enter the scene at slightly different, cascading times, creating a much more organic and cinematic fluid motion. Excellent. Now, to take our scene to an even more realistic level, let's move on to the lighting phase. Just like we did before, let's bring our HDR layer into the scene. Then, under the light settings, open the source option, select our HDR texture, and make those reflections look absolutely flawless. Great! Now if you don't see the shadows appearing in your workspace, go to the Advanced tab, open the Render settings, and select Fit to Scene. This should fix it and bring the shadows into your scene. Next, open the Transform options under the light settings and adjust the direction of the light across the canvas. If you've done all of this and the shadows are still missing, simply switch your preview resolution from half to full. Once it's on full resolution, you'll see the shadows render correctly. Excellent. Now, let's head back to our main composition and locate the exact timestamp where the 5th scene ends. We'll drag our final scene and align it right at the end of the 5th scene. Select the 5th scene layer, use Split Layer to cut it, and delete the unnecessary trailing part. Now, as a final adjustment, let's perfect the timing for when all the models completely settle into the frame. Next, let's create a new black solid layer and trim it from the beginning, pushing it toward the end of the timeline. To close out the video, I'm bringing in the pre-rendered logo animation that I created earlier and placing it at the very end. I'll make a few micro adjustments here to ensure a flawless transition. Finally, as the ultimate finishing touch for our entire project, select all layers and activate Motion Blur to give the movement that professional, organic look. And that's a wrap! We've successfully completed our 3D Red Bull product animation in After Effects. From staging to lighting, we covered all the essential steps for a professional look. I hope this tutorial helps elevate your projects. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more content. Drop your questions in the comments below. I'll be answering them all. See you in the next tutorial. Keep creating!